We go now to Arizona Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, who joins us this morning from Tucson. Senator, President Trump could lift some but not all sanctions on Russia unless Congress agrees to do it. Is there any appetite to lift them?
I don't have an appetite to lift them. Putin continues to execute an illegal war where he is intentionally killing women, children, old people. I visited Ukraine several months ago, went to a veterans hospital where nurses there just witnessed horrible atrocities. So I think if anything, Margaret, we need to continue to put the pressure on Putin, on Russia, make them pay for this illegal war attacking our NATO ally. And I've got to say, I know you talked to Mark Ruta earlier in the Ambassador about the visit on Friday in Alaska. And Margaret, I hope we got something out of this. Putin is a war criminal. This is not a show of strength to allow him to fly into the United States, to land here to negotiate with our president. I don't know for certain. I don't know what was the ground rules that were set for this negotiation, but I would expect that this administration should have extracted something for this visit.
And we're trying to seek those details ourselves. Multiple intelligence officials have told my CBS colleague Jim Laporta that there was a U.S. directive in recent weeks that all Russia-Ukraine peace negotiation information should not be shared with our partners who are part of the Five Eyes, countries like Australia and the UK that share information with us. You sit on the Intelligence Committee. Were you aware of that directive, and what does it indicate?
I was not aware of it. We have a special relationship with those Five Eyes partners. And I think that relationship makes all of us collectively safer. So if it was up to me, we would continue to share that information with those allies. Restricting information about Russia, Ukraine, about the situation in Iran, about what's going on in Gaza or the Western Pacific with, China just makes us all less safe. So I was not aware of it, but it does not seem like an appropriate thing to do.
Senator, I have more to talk to you about in regard to immigration and other domestic matters. We're going to have to take a break and come back to do that. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return to our conversation now with Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. Senator, I know you were at an Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility last week, and you posted about it, including a meeting you had with a detained woman who I understand has a son who is a United States Marine. And she had been in the U.S. for 2 decades, was babysitting her grandson on her son's base when she was detained. Are you asking or somehow managing to get her to be an exception to the rule to allow her to stay in the United States?
Margaret, I spent about 3 hours or so over at the Eloy Detention Center and met with two women. One was Maria, the one you just mentioned, whose son was a U.S. Marine, whose daughter-in-law was a U.S. Marine. And the daughter-in-law needed to have an operation, so she came from New Jersey. She's lived in the country for 20 years, and then she winds up in CBP custody. I asked her about when her son graduated from boot camp and how that made her felt. She started crying and said it was so proud. She was so proud that her son was a U.S. Marine. He's about to re-enlist. This woman is no threat to society. I also met a business owner who's been in the United States for over 20 years. She's got 70 employees. She's got 3 restaurants. She's about to open another one. Again, this is a mom. Her daughter's a U.S. citizen. Her mother's a U.S. citizen. Sister's a U.S. citizen. Husband's a U.S. citizen. Neither of these women are a threat to society. And what I saw at Eloy were a lot of moms and grandmothers who could be out with their families, who could be going to work as they go through whatever immigration process they're in. And for Maria, the mom of the Marine, there is a process that for somebody on active duty, that their parents have a process to become a permanent resident and eventually a U.S. citizen. And this is not where we should be. And I don't think this is what the American people wanted. Margaret, the border security issue under President Biden was not working, and I pushed the administration on that. But we have now swung drastically in another direction, and I don't think this is what the American people want either.
Well, to your point, though, President Trump won your state by almost 6 points in November, and you know immigration was one of his top promises to go ahead with this crackdown. And you did say you want more done. Is there a benefit to Arizona that just came from this massive infusion from taxpayer dollars into mass deportations? Or are you saying here that these personal cases show that the entire process is flawed?
I think right now I think you have to draw a distinction with what is going on at the border and enforcing border security and making sure fentanyl isn't coming through our southern border, but also the smuggling of migrants. That wasn't working. But rounding up people in their communities and mass deportation and ICE agents showing up masked at schools. I've been trying to help out a kid that's in detention. He was 14 years old. He lives in Chandler, Arizona, and he was picked up going to school. I had another situation here with a kid who was on his Little League trip in a baseball tournament. Border Patrol pulls over the vehicle, identifies the brown kid. He winds up in lockup for a week. Now, we were able to get him out. He was 13 years old on a baseball trip. Yeah. This isn't what the American people wanted, and I don't think it's consistent with our values.
Well, Senator, this is a really important and emotional issue, and we're going to have to leave it there for today. But I want to have another one with you as you continue to gather information about how this infusion of money is being spent. $45 billion to expand ICE detention facilities, and we're going to pick up that conversation with Texas Republican Congressman Tony Gonzales, who joins us now from San Antonio. Congressman, welcome back to Face the Nation. You just heard Senator Kelly describe the frustration he experienced and the personal stories he witnessed in these ICE detention facilities. Given your oversight role, have you had similar concerns?
Good morning, Margaret. And while I appreciate Senator Kelly's service, the part that he's getting wrong with ICE is for every sad story of someone being deported, there's 10 sad stories of Americans that have had their lives turned upside down because of the illegal immigration. And to be demonizing ICE agents is not right. You know, right now, ICE agents have a 1,000% increase on attacks, yet they're seeing a huge increase in amount of people that want to serve. There's currently 10,000 vacancies, and they have nearly 100,000 applications. I do think there's a balance where we need to go after these convicted criminals, the worst of the worst, and be able to tackle some of that. But we should be encouraging this enforcement of law, not these sanctuary cities that allow the lawlessness to take place.
No, and I think the senator was talking about how it just wasn't working during the last administration, so he was not praising that past system. But in terms of how the current one is being operated, I know you had raised concern that those being mass deported were not necessarily the worst of the worst and violent offenders. I know that because you issued that letter to ICE, and the data that came back showed that most of the convictions were for traffic or immigration offenses, not violent criminals. Less than 1% of the convictions of those deported were for homicide. Only 1.2% were for sexual assault. So doesn't that speak, though, to what Senator Kelly was saying, which is it's not the criminals, it's the grandmas?
Well, he's just telling the grandma story. He's not talking about, how DHS rounded up pedophiles and some other violent actors in Los Angeles and throughout the country. So you have to tell all sides to it. But you hit it right on the head earlier when you said immigration is a very emotional conversation, and it's where we have to get it right. You have to separate those that may be in a different situation than the worst of the worst. What I am encouraged to see is I am encouraged that after we have passed the one big beautiful bill and have given DHS $45 billion, that they are now creating these task forces and going after very strategic operations that take out the pedophiles, the murderers. Numbers matter, but more specifically, who is being detained. Traffic violations don't excite me as much, and I don't think keep communities as safe as taking out, murderers and convicted criminals that are a danger to all communities.
Do I hear you saying that this new money will now allow them to actually focus on violent offenders instead of just anyone they encounter who did at one point enter illegally?
Yes, and this is what I'm seeing, is I'm seeing a mix of these self-deportations. Secretary Noem has been very active. She's essentially has traveled Central and South America talking to a lot of heads of state, and a lot of folks are self-deporting back to these countries to the tune of hundreds of thousands. I think what that does is that alleviates some of the stress on DHS, essentially to put numbers on the board and instead create these task forces to go after these bad actors. To me, that's the secret sauce. You create these task forces and get after the worst of the worst.
Okay. We do see, though, in the courts that the Trump administration is trying to do away with limits on child detention. One of ICE's only family detention facilities is in your district in Texas. And you did vote for the One Big Beautiful Bill. And it includes a provision that allows families with children to be held indefinitely, which contradicts that long-standing precedent of putting a 20-day limit on detaining children. Do you think that needs to be changed in future legislation? Should there be limits on detaining kids?
Possibly. I mean, the legislative piece is a much more long road. What I've seen under both the Biden administration and the Trump administration is that it's a delicate balance, right? How do you keep families together? How do you make sure that there is coordination to what country they're going to? But what we don't want to see is somebody indefinitely held without having due process. But what we do want to see is after that due process is completed, that they're immediately removed in a humane environment. And, I visited these facilities under both administrations, and I've never had a problem with ICE facilities. They've always allowed me to view everything I wanted. I've taken pictures, I've done videos, I've spoken to people that were there, and I think that's the important part. Our government needs to be transparent to what's happening.
And we would love to take our cameras into some of those facilities if you could help us do that, sir, because we don't have that access. And I know a number of those immigration advocates have said that. They are frustrated they don't have more access now to share with the public what they're hearing. But now I do want to ask you about this Fort Bliss facility, an Army base that's partially in your district. I understand they're trying to turn it into a place with tents, soft-sided tents, to hold 1,000 individuals under ICE custody. Doesn't blurring the lines between law enforcement and the military start to get us into uncomfortable territory?
It could, but let me give you some of the details on that facility in particular. One, that the soft-sided facility is located right next door to the current ICE facility in El Paso. So while it's on Fort Bliss, it really in many cases is managed by ICE. Some other details, there's already over 100,000 illegal aliens in that facility. By the end of the week, I expect that number will raise up to over 1,000, and then in the coming weeks, it will raise to several thousand. Now, the price tag, $1.2 billion. I am a little concerned that the initial cost is $230 million that the Department of Defense is paying for, and so that's where I don't. Fort Bliss is the Swiss Army knife of the Army. They do a fantastic job of whatever mission gets sent their way, but I don't want to see Department of Defense get stuck with the bill, if you will. These is where the details matter. We just passed this $45 billion for border security. I'm hoping some of those funds reimburse Department of Defense for their efforts.
But the mixing of military and law enforcement, that part, besides the accounting, doesn't that make you uncomfortable?
Yeah, It does. I mean, well, you have to get it right. If it's on base and, if there's a collaboration, the fact is it makes it a streamlined process because of how close it is to the airfield, Briggs Airfield. So that in turn makes a safety issue and it makes it just a cleaner effort. So there's a balance there, but I don't want it long term. I don't want to see soldiers operating in space. I don't think they want to be doing that. Yeah. But the fact that they're in there now, it's a seamless transition right now.
All right, Tony Gonzales, Congressman, appreciate your time. We'll be right back. We turn now to former Surgeon General Dr. Jerome Adams, who served in the first Trump administration. Welcome back to Face the Nation.
Thank you, Margaret.
I want to ask you about this tragic shooting Friday in Atlanta. I understand there were at least 4 CDC buildings that were shot at, and our colleagues are reporting investigators are looking at the motives, including that the suspect believed he was sick as a result of the COVID vaccine. What do you make of the incident itself, as well as the broader impact on the health workers there on the grounds of the CDC?
Yes. Well, first off, on behalf of the American people, I want to say thank you to the dedicated professionals at the CDC and to all public health and medical workers across this country. And I also want to honor Officer David Rose, who made the ultimate sacrifice while protecting those families and people who work at the CDC. My heartfelt condolences go out to his family, his friends, and his colleagues. And finally, I want to be clear, because our Secretary of HHS has not been. Violence is never the answer, no matter your level of frustration or anger with the system. We have to find better, more peaceful ways to express our concerns and work towards solutions. How you respond to a crisis defines a leader. And quite frankly, Secretary Kennedy has failed in his first major test in this regard. It took him over 18 hours to issue a tepid response to these horrific shootings. And that's not even considering how his inflammatory rhetoric in the past has actually contributed to a lot of what's been going on.
Those are some strong words. I mean, the secretary did issue a statement saying no one should face violence while working to protect the health of others. You think he needs to more directly condemn this shooter and his alleged motivations? I mean, there has been, to be fair, a lot of angry rhetoric against health officials for years now. Why do you think the secretary himself needs to address it?
Well, the secretary, before he was considering running for president or secretary, was involved in an outbreak in American Samoa where 83 people died, over 70 of them children, in response to a measles outbreak, which local officials on the ground there said he helped inflame. As president, he said, I will drain the cesspool at the CDC and hold people responsible. When he was running for president, he made this statement just last year. Unfortunately, someone beat him to trying to hold people responsible. And again, as Secretary of HHS, it took him 18 hours to respond to this shooting, and he still has not unequivocally condemned the violence. He said no one should be harmed while working to protect the public. There's an out there, Margaret. If you don't believe that people are working to protect the public, then that means it's okay to commit violence, at least in some people's eyes. I'm upset because people at the CDC were calling me while this was going on, asking for cover that they couldn't get from their secretary.
I think what you were referring to are some of what Secretary Kennedy said when he was a presidential candidate.
Correct.
But even in office, the FDA commissioner on this program said he wrote an article, Why the People Don't Trust the CDC. The secretary himself has said in the past the CDC is a cesspool of corruption. You, to be clear, want the leaders of our health institutions to come out and say they have confidence in the CDC now?
Exactly. I wrote a recent op-ed that is in Stat News where I talked about this. As leaders, we have to be responsible with what we're saying and how we're saying it. We have to understand people are listening. And when you call the CDC a cesspool, when you say, I will hold people responsible, when you make claims that have been proven false time and time again about safety and efficacy of vaccines, that can cause unintended consequences. And so while I don't know Secretary Kennedy personally, and I don't want to make assertions about his character, I will say based on his actions and his rhetoric, he's fanning the flames that lead to situations like we saw at the CDC.
I want to ask you about health policy because days earlier, Secretary Kennedy made an announcement that the U.S. is halting $500 million for vaccine research into that technology known as mRNA. You're very familiar with it because it was used during Operation Warp Speed to very quickly get that COVID vaccine. Secretary Kennedy said, though, mRNA vaccines, quote, don't work against upper respiratory infections. Do you know what he means? And what does stopping this research do for pandemic preparations?
Well, that's simply not true. We know that by the most conservative estimates, over 2 million lives have been saved because of mRNA technology. It helped us develop COVID-19 vaccines in record time. And it's quite frankly President Trump's greatest achievement. It's fascinating to me that in this conversation about whether he should receive the Nobel Prize for something, the thing that he should be considered for the Nobel Prize for, his health secretary is trying to undermine. For folks who may not be familiar, though, Margaret, mRNA stands for messenger mRNA. It's a natural molecule that's in all of our bodies. It's like a recipe card that tells your body how to make a protein. And this idea, again, helps us develop vaccines and new treatments for everything from cancer, melanoma, which my wife has, to HIV, to better flu vaccines and Zika. These are advances that are not going to happen now. People are going to die because we're cutting short funding for this technology.
It's interesting you talk about President Trump's great achievement there because he was asked by my colleague Nancy Cordes about Operation Warp Speed, and this is what he said this week. Take a listen.
Operation Warp Speed was, whether you're Republican or Democrat, considered one of the most incredible things ever done in this country. The efficiency, the way it was done, the distribution, everything about it has been amazing.
What would have happened in 2020 if we didn't have mRNA vaccines?
If we did not have mRNA vaccines, the best experts at the time, Bill Gates, Tony Fauci, were saying it would have taken at least 18 to 24 additional months to get a vaccine. The record before that, Margaret, was 6 years to get a vaccine using the technology that Secretary Kennedy says he wants to go back to, whole virus technology. And so, as I mentioned, by the most conservative estimates, at least 2 million lives were saved. Many people say that up to 20 million lives were saved because of these vaccines. It is President Trump's greatest achievement, bar none.
Dr. Adams, I appreciate your time. We reached out to the Health and Human Services Department to ask if they wanted to respond to the former Surgeon General's views on that CDC shooting. HHS referred us back to the Secretary's earlier statement. We'll be back in a moment. President Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff met yesterday in Spain with Qatar's prime minister, all in pursuit of a deal to end Israel's war in the Gaza Strip and to free the hostages. Our Deborah Pata has the latest from Israel.
For 674 days, Einaf Sangaukar has campaigned for her son Matan's freedom from Hamas captivity. Behind her, 80% of Israelis who want the war to end, among them hostage relatives who are angry and terrified.
But my husband is still there. Every invasion, every bullet, every airstrike could cost him his life.
Prime Minister Netanyahu's new war plan includes seizing Gaza City and occupying the whole territory in a bid to disarm Hamas and hand control to Arab forces, despite no agreement with any Arab nation. But Israel Defense Forces Chief of Staff reportedly believes it will endanger the hostages and their exhausted troops. Veteran Israeli hostage negotiator Gershon Baskin told us there is still a 2-week window to negotiate a ceasefire.
And once the war expands, it's going to be very difficult to turn it back. And a word of warning to Hamas: if the hostages die from starvation, the Americans are going to tell Israel, do whatever you need to do.
So who is stopping a deal?
Well, until now, it has been mostly Netanyahu and his government. President Trump needs to tell Netanyahu, I said for many months, I want this war to end. End it. Do it.
Well over 500,000 Palestinians fled Gaza City as the IDF tried to root out Hamas, but hundreds of thousands returned during the January ceasefire. Like Ibrahim Arabia, who had this plea for President Trump. Our message from the rubble of Gaza, he said, we want peace. Please stand with us. He now faces another forced evacuation, but this time he says he will not leave.
That was Deborah Pata reporting in Israel. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.